residence is in Iowa, but he and his wife have a home here as well. His connection to the Suncoast goes much deeper than that. He's the leading force behind the Suncoast News Network, also known as WSNN. As president and COO of Citadel Communications, SNN's parent company, Ray Cole lends his decades of experience to lead the station through today's changing landscape of broadcasting. And that's one of the topics we're going to touch on today. He served or has served on the boards of no less than 20 organizations, including the Board of Governors of ABC Television, the Iowa Broadcasters Association, and Briarcliff University. And, yeah, there's more. He's the author of Hangin' With Winners, an engaging series of stories on some of the most fascinating people in broadcasting and sports. People he's personally known and worked with, including, and yes, I'm not above name dropping, Howard Cosell, Peter Jennings, Dick Vitale, a Sarasota resident, and so many others. Before I use up our time with more accolades, let me introduce you to Ray Cole. Ray, it is an honor, a pleasure to have you here on Suncoast People.
I'm really glad to join you, Bob. And Hanging with Winners is a very personal journey through my career that covered 5 decades, and meeting you in more recent years has been my great privilege, and I put you in the winner category. So glad to be here.
Well, thank you. I'm deeply touched. You mentioned Howard Cosell, and there's a whole chapter about Howard Cosell, and I would be remiss if I didn't ask you, what was Howard Cosell? And I'm going to tell folks at home, pardon me, just for the younger people, Howard Cosell was a world-famous sportscaster, commentator, and would it be fair, Ray, to say that he wasn't afraid to express his opinions?
Yeah, I think that's probably what Howard was known for most. He actually wrote a book with the title Telling It Like It Is.
Yep.
And he very much hung his career on that approach to covering sports and life itself. An interesting character. The Hanging with Winners is centered around 32 profiles of people like Howard Cosell and the others you mentioned, and Barbara Walters and Michael J. Fox and so forth. People who I was very blessed to cross paths with during the course of my career.
Right.
People that I thought not only enriched my career, but really graced my life. Howard is probably the most unique profile in the book, because my publisher tried to talk me out of including it.
Really?
Because it is so out of form with all of the other profiles. It's essentially one long anecdote.
Yeah,
and
but
it's centered,
what a story.
And it's centered around my working for years to get Howard to join me in Iowa for an event that raised money for some kids organizations. I had met Howard at ABC meetings through the years. I was in the booth for Monday Night Football in Kansas City one year when he was still calling that game for ABC. And so if your viewers pick up the book and read the Howard Cosell, they'll see that it's a little out of sorts with the other profiles, but I get an awful lot of feedback from people who really enjoyed that profile as much or more than any of the others.
Well, all the profiles are absolutely worth a read, but you could buy the book just for the Howard Cosell story alone, because
you're generous.
I was sitting there reading, going, really? And then, yeah, that sounds like it certainly fits in with the persona that we know of him. And oftentimes, famous people have, their outward persona and then who they really are behind that. I want to touch on the word winners. And some people might think that, well, gee, they're winners, there must be losers. But that's not what you're talking about here. Why use the word winners when talking about these people?
Well, when I was sitting down and did an outline for the book and tried to narrow it down, as I said, to 32 or so people that I felt I wanted to expand upon in terms of my relationship with them, winner was the word that came up. And so I talk about this in the prologue of the book, that there's a famous astronaut from Iowa named Peggy Whitson. Peggy grew up in a very small town in Iowa. She's the very same age that I am. When we were 13, I was at a Boy Scout camp, and she was at home watching Neil Armstrong walk on the moon for the first time, turned to her mother and said, "I'm going to do that someday." She went to a small college in Iowa and then went to Rice University where she got her PhD and then joined NASA and became an astronaut. To this day holds the record for the woman who has spent the most time walking in space. She came back. She was named their chief astronaut. So she excelled. And I tell that story about Peggy Whitson because she sort of exemplifies what a winner is to me. And when I speak to groups, I talk about a favorite Chinese proverb of mine, which goes something like, "Pearls don't lie on the seashore. If you want one, you must dive for it." People like Peggy Whitson, people like Barbara Walters, people like Bob Iger from the Walt Disney Company, all these people who are profiled in the book, they understood the deep meaning of that Chinese proverb. They understood that you had to have a dream, you had to have an objective or a goal. They understood the need to work hard and having all the other attributes that are identified in chapter 7 of the book, which sort of summarizes all of the qualities and traits and attributes and characteristics that help define a winner. They understood the importance of having those kinds of traits. And then most of all, they understood the necessity to dive in. So to me, that's what I wanted to do with the book. There is no secret recipe or formula for being a winner. And that comes out through the book. It's very, very subjective, okay? It is not precise. And it's not something, as I said, that you can pull together and say, if I do these 10 things, I'm going to be a winner. Life doesn't work that way.
Don't you think there's some generalities, for instance, perseverance?
Yeah,
But anybody, whether you are, a taxi driver or running a corporation or whatever you may be, that the perseverance is an aspect of that.
Common traits. The one that was cited in our interviews, my co-author and I, we did 80 interviews. A lot of people that are contributors to the book who weren't necessarily profiled. And of all the interviews we did, the number one quality that came up was a simple one. It was being kind. Showing kindness and respect and empathy to others, all of them found to be foundational to having any kind of success in your career and for that matter, happiness in your life. Being kind. The second one, which surprised me a little bit, kindness did not at all, but the second one was being curious and maintaining a level of curiosity throughout all the phases and stages of your life and your career. And Bob Iger from the Walt Disney Company talked about curiosity oftentimes being the fuel source for winning decisions, and that you need to maintain curiosity to help strip away some predetermined thoughts or biases you might have, and to be dismissive of ideas in ways that you might be if you weren't remaining curious. You talked about perseverance. The word that came up among a lot of people, which is a word I hadn't used often, was grit. Having grit.
That's synonymous.
There's a wonderful ESPN basketball analyst, Fran Fraschilla, former basketball coach earlier in his career, works for ESPN now. He's a good friend of Dick Vitale's, as you pointed out in the intro, who lives in Lakewood Ranch. And he defined grit as a combination of passion and perseverance. Your word, perseverance. That the people in the book pointed to. And they pointed to one other one, and I list about 16 or 17 of these in chapter 7. But the other thing that they talk about was accepting failure. Not just accepting failure, but embracing adversity. And a lot of people in this book faced a lot of adversity. Jay Williams, the great basketball player, he was a national champion for Duke. He was number 2 in the draft after turning pro after his junior year. He went pro a year early, and had a 1-year career in the NBA because he wrapped a motorcycle around a telephone pole. Motorcycle he shouldn't have been riding, and he certainly shouldn't have been driving it at the high speed that he was.
Yeah.
And you talk about adversity, and he's now gone in. He's a good friend. He's married, has 2 kids, and has a wonderful career at ESPN. Mm-hmm. People like Barbara Walters have no idea the adversity she went through.
Boy,
Okay.
talk about breaking some glass ceilings back in the early 60s. People don't realize what a game changer she was.
Yeah, she passed away in December, as you know, and all of the obituaries and all of the expression of sadness and condolences around her passing, all of them touched on how responsible she is for the careers that so many others have today. My co-author had a wonderful career at the Des Moines Register, and I needed a professional writer to help me pull this together. And I told him we could bang it out in 2 or 3 months. We'd interview 15 to 20 people. It took 20 months, and we
Yeah.
interviewed 80 people.
Yeah.
But it was a fun journey, not the one that I think I necessarily expected, but in many respects more gratifying than I thought it might be.
You mentioned some great names in both sports and in in broadcast journalism, and I know and have met some of these people as well. And yes, grit, perseverance, curiosity. I think to be good as a broadcast journalist, you have to be curious. You have to wonder why. You have to wonder, is this person telling me a story? What's behind whatever it is that they're talking about or whatever is happening? There has to be all of these things. Getting back to winning, I wanted to share with you something that really struck me, if I may, from the book. And you mentioned Robin Roberts, who actually I met once and worked for about 10 minutes with her very briefly, but that's all another story. Pat Summitt.
The great women's basketball coach
Yes.
from the University of Tennessee who passed away a few years ago. Make sure your viewers know who Pat Summitt is. She's one of the best.
And you write here, Pat Summitt once talked about winning in a way that adds even greater nuance to Robin's definition of it, her close friend and legendary coach. And Summitt said, winning is fun, sure, but winning is not the point. That was an aha right there. Wanting to win is the point. Not giving up is the point. Not letting up is the point. Never being satisfied with what you've done is the point. How have you lived your life as a winner? Have you been as persistent, as gritty? Do you consider yourself an individual of grit, of not giving up?
I'm from a small town in northwest Iowa, grew up in my dad's grocery store where I started working at the age of 5. So I think that small town experience, 55 kids in my graduating class, I think it served me well. I think that those small town roots help instill a work ethic, which goes along with that grit. You need both. But I'll tell you, Bob, I'm gonna tie back that great Pat Summitt quote to something you talked about earlier, and it is not looking at winning in the normal context that conjures up that other word, losing.
Right.
I had people we interviewed for this who emphasize that to think about losing being to have winning and losing is the antithesis of winning, right? And so the best interview that we had, and it's in the book, was with, on those lines, is Diane Sawyer. And Diane was actually a little put off with the premise of the book, and I worked with Diane for a long time on a number of fronts. She goes, I'm not sure. I've never thought about my life in terms of being a winner or in terms of winning. And I'm struggling, Ray, to see where you're going with this. And so we engaged, and then she came up with one of the great quotes you'll find in the book. And she says, winning is about that point in your life where purpose meets joy.
Oh, yes.
Where you get to wake up every day, and the thing you want to do is the thing you get to do. When you feel you've accomplished something that is really important to you, and all of that somehow makes the world better. Quote, close quote. I said, Diane, you just gave us the best definition of winning that I think we could ever come up with. So that's where I would sort of go as a follow-up to the Pat Summitt quote. It's not just about winning, as you said in the Pat. It's about having the desire to win. It's about never giving up. It's about never letting up. That's what Pat Summitt said.
Finding your purpose, finding your passion,
Yeah.
and finding joy.
And you know what her advice to Robin Roberts was in a succeeding paragraph in that book? When Robin was going through all of her health struggles and challenges, adversity, we used that word earlier, great adversity that Robin's overcome.
Yes.
The advice from Pat Summitt, left foot, right foot, breathe. Left foot, right foot, breathe. Now, how good of advice is that for all of us when we face adversity in our lives?
Yeah. Which also goes along the lines of this too shall pass.
Sure does.
It sure does. Who's the biggest influence in your life? You mentioned growing up in this very small Iowa town.
I would start, and this was cited by a lot of the winners that we profiled in the book, and that is their parents. And I would say that certainly applied to me. My father was in the grocery business. My mother was a teacher, elementary school teacher. I got a work ethic from my father, and I got a great appreciation for education from my mother. And they were both tremendous role models in almost all aspects of your life. In terms of my professional career, I've been with a gentleman named Phil Lombardo now for 35 years. You were very generous, if not overly generous, in the introduction talking about my role at SNN. Well, it's really Phil Lombardo, who's had a home on Longboat Key since the late 80s, who took an interest in SNN, and especially when it was in some real serious financial difficulties in the 2012-13 window. And it was his stepping in that has allowed WSNN to continue to serve viewers along the Suncoast with what we think is a very hyper-local program service with news and weather and sports. And if when hurricane season rolls around, everybody follows Justin Mosley and his very even-tempered, non-hype approach to covering the weather. We have another competitor in Sarasota, and they do a nice job, but they don't cover local sports. We do. We have the only sports director, and we think that's an important part of covering the Suncoast. And sports is important here. You look at the football season, basketball season, girls volleyball, baseball, softball.
Sure. Our high school and college, and not to mention spring training.
Spring training is here. That's a big thing. In more recent years, we don't put much emphasis on Tampa, but it's been hard to ignore the Bucks the last few years. We do a little bit with the Rays during the summer, but the bottom line is that our focus is on covering the really local news and happenings in and around Sarasota, Bradenton. We focus on Sarasota County, Manatee County, And we go down towards Venice with our signal and with our coverage footprint as well.
Speaking of which, we're going to take a quick break because that's part of the business. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, I'm going to be talking more with Ray Cole about what has inspired him. Why did he get into this crazy business that we call broadcast television? And perhaps we'll find out what's he going to really do when he retires. We'll be right back. This program is made possible through your support. Please subscribe, follow, and like on these platforms. You can also support us by going to patreon.com/SuncoastPeople. Thank you. And we're back with Ray Cole, President and COO of SNN, and a part-time resident here, but your heart is, I guess, you're really an Iowan, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm a native Iowan. We have 3 kids and 5 grandkids who all live within 15 minutes of our home in Des Moines. So
you're really, your heart's really in Iowa. I mean, you care about the Suncoast and you've got interests here, but your heart is there. Do you ever see yourself retiring and spending more time down here?
Sure. A real possibility as I slow down here in the coming year. I come down here now and I find myself working more than taking it easy. But I've been coming down to Sarasota since the late 80s, since my partner Phil Lombardo's had a place out on Longboat Key. And so I've been coming down here a long time, Bob. And I just think this is a special area. I've spent time over on the other coast. I've spent time up and down the Gulf Coast. I think the Sarasota area is a very, very unique and special area. It's pretty hard to beat.
It really is. I've definitely found a new home for myself here and love it here as well. And I have to admit that I do not miss the cold Wisconsin and Minnesota winters. For me, looking at snow is something I like to do in photographs and not while standing knee deep in it, because I've done that plenty of times. How has the television business changed since you began? You said 35 years that you've been doing this?
I've been with Phil Lombardo 35 years. I've been doing local television for 45 years.
Or you were like a kindergartner when you started,
yeah,
right?
Something like that. I actually started as an intern my junior year of college.
Yeah.
So I was 20 years old, and I'll be 68 this year, so you do the math, almost 48 years.
Wow.
And the industry was very heavily regulated. And what we see now is it's less regulated. There's less ownership restrictions. You see on the radio side, you see companies like iHeart, with hundreds and hundreds of stations. You see on the television side companies like Sinclair and Nexstar
and Gray,
who owns Channel 7 here, all owning hundreds of stations.
Yeah, 180.
And the technology has changed. When I was growing up, I saw the transition from black and white to color. As a broadcast executive, I experienced up close and personal the transition from analog to digital. And now there's a further transition from broadcasting to streaming. All of that is playing into tremendous changes. Viewers, they want to consume video when they want, how they want. And they have so much greater control over the way they watch. So all of that contributes to how viewers manage their screen time. And that screen may not be that 50-inch television. That screen may be that phone, very likely their laptop, very likely an iPad. And all of that quote-unquote screen time is pulling and tugging at people and consumers in different ways. For me as a broadcaster, what hasn't changed is the concept of localism. And I believe there will always be a place. There was just a study released, a research piece released recently. There's an awful lot of talk about about the faith and confidence or lack of same with viewers when it comes to national media. When it comes to local television, those ratings are much different. And I think that local broadcasters have to really work hard to safeguard that, to not be caught up in the kinds of things that are coming out of, the lawsuit right now with Dominion and Fox News and other situations like that really have a tendency to undermine the faith that viewers can put in what they're watching.
What else has not changed in broadcasting, do you think?
Well, I think the need to focus on localism hasn't changed.
Right.
I
what
would
about
reiterate
entertainment?
that.
Do you think?
I think entertainment that gets stretched because of what's allowed to air on a cable network or a streaming platform is so different than what's allowed on a broadcast platform. I don't think that's necessarily bad in terms of the adult themes and the language, and I still think that over-the-air television with their network partners can still produce programming. We rely more on sports than we ever have before because it's quote unquote the ultimate first-run program. It's not something that you want to DVR. Not too many people want to watch that Tampa Bay Bucks game the next day,
right?
When they know the score,
right?
And so that I think if one of the things that's changed is the reliance and emphasis on live programming, not just sports, but predominantly sports, but
local news is
local
should
news
be
is
live.
there, but special event programming like
Sure.
the Oscars and the Grammys, and but even those events are struggling anymore.
Yeah.
I just saw the ratings for the recent broadcast of the SAG Awards was way down.
Yeah.
And there's some reasons for that. Those award shows I don't think have kept up with producing them in a way that especially younger viewers will find compelling. And there's a promo running for the upcoming Oscars with Jimmy Kimmel as the host. Jimmy Kimmel's profiled in my book. He's a dear friend, and Jimmy makes a joke out of the fact that the broadcast is going to be 3 hours long, and he goes, "Yeah, right." And so I think there's issues there that contribute to
Sure.
to that. Challenges that you don't have with a good football game or a good NBA Finals game or
Sure.
a World Series game or whatever sporting event
when you
want.
really don't know the outcomes and all of that. You alluded a few minutes ago to maybe slowing down a little bit, maybe making more time for yourself in the not too distant future.
Yeah, I see myself slowing down but not stopping. I serve. I have a balance. I serve on the boards of some of businesses, commercial enterprises, that I'll continue to serve on. But I balance those off with work on nonprofit boards. The Broadcasters Foundation of America, I serve on their board, their executive committee. I chair what's known as the Angel Fund, which is a big annual fundraising campaign. We help broadcasters who, through no fault of their own, have fallen on hard times. We should tell your viewers that all of the proceeds from my book have gone to 5 charities, 6 charities, 6, I guess. I call them winning organizations and not charities. One of those is the Broadcasters Foundation, which I believe strongly in their mission. Another one is the V Foundation. In this book, Dick Vitale is profiled. The V Foundation, which is essentially a profile of Jim Valvano, is in this book. The ESPYs, which benefits the V Foundation in ways that most readers might not know before they read the book. So all that by way of saying, I was introduced to Jim Valvano by Dick Vitale in 1991. Jimmy V passed away in 1993. Everybody remembers we're coming up on the 30th anniversary of the founding of the V Foundation, which happened at the very first ESPYs Award in 1993, where he gave his famous speech. And you remember that speech? Some things that came out of it is, live every day in a way where you laugh and you think and you cry. And he talked about cancer, and he died 6 weeks after that famous speech. how cancer could take away all his physical abilities, but it would never touch his mind, his heart, or his soul. And then the last thing that he said that has really lasted is the mantra of the V Foundation to this day, which is don't give up, don't ever give up. And that 11-second speech I saw ranked as one of the top 10 speeches in the 20th century, at the turn of the century.
And rightfully so.
And rightfully so. It's a
powerful words. And Dick Vitale is certainly one of those sports legends who didn't shy away from expressing his opinion or expressing his thoughts, and certainly someone who has grit and persevered. I mean, he had a battle with cancer here not too long ago.
The last 18 months.
And you know, he's still hanging in there. And
I say it in the book, Bob.
Yeah.
Dick's in, like, I kid him, in golf you can't have more than 14 clubs in your bag or you get penalized. I said to Dick, I said, we're going to start penalizing you because I think you're in 14 halls of fame. No more halls of fame for you. and the biggest one that he's in, that he's probably most proud of, is the Basketball Hall of Fame.
Sure. Well,
and it was
great
inducted
coach.
several years ago. But what I say in the book about Dick, Dick's legacy will have far less to do with basketball and being a coach and being the quintessential analyst over the last 30 plus years for ESPN. He called their very first basketball game, by the way. That's how far back Dick goes with ESPN. His legacy will have less to do with all of that and more to do with what he's done to raise dollars for pediatric cancer research. Mm-hmm. He believes to his very fiber that no parent should hear the words, "Your child has cancer." Mm-hmm. I've toured children's hospitals with Dick. It is an amazing thing to witness. He's a very special person. Nobody has done more to really continue the legacy and to honor the dream of Jimmy V than Dick Vitale. He's a pretty special person. He's a winner if there ever was one.
Well, you are absolutely a winner on many levels. I'm truly honored to have been able to meet you and get to know you a little bit. And I gotta ask, where do you find your energy? How do you people talk about centering themselves and kind of getting back their own energy so that they can go out and do what you do every day. What do you do for yourself so that you can engage so much with so many different?
There's a concept in the book that's addressed called being a servant leader, and that's sort of a buzzword these days. Servant leadership, being a servant leader. And I guess I would try to wrap myself around that to a point where all these connections that I was able to forge over the course of my career, I'm very blessed to have done that. At the end of the day, it's about stepping out and finding the inspiration to use those relationships, to leverage those connections in a way that does good for others and then hopefully the community at large. And I was brought up in my broadcasting career with the philosophy that in order to do well, you have to do good, and that you will be more successful. I think that concept can apply to a lot of businesses, but it is especially true for broadcasting. You have to serve your community in a servant leadership kind of way. You have to serve your community, and I was very proud of what we did in markets we had stations in Des Moines, Iowa, and Sioux City, Iowa, and the Quad Cities, which is Davenport, Iowa, and Lincoln, Nebraska, and Providence, Rhode Island, and Burlington, Vermont, and Binghamton, New York, Buffalo, New York, and now Sarasota, Florida with SNN. I think it's really important. We're very proud every year to help Dick Vitale with his gala. Mm-hmm. We help promote it. We provide extended coverage of that. And it's because of the good works that he does. He leverages his connections. He uses his relationships. It's a who's who in the sports world every May here in Sarasota, Florida at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel. Mm-hmm. Last year, I attended the event, and I think I counted 60 basketball coaches in that room, household names. And then he has honorees. This year, 2 of his honorees are John and Patrick McEnroe from the tennis world.
And it's always in May.
It's always the first week in May.
Always the first week in May. So that's something that we can look forward to. And we're going to put up on the screen the details of the event. And perhaps
Friday, May 5th. I kidded Dick. Dick would pick the Vitale Gala to be celebrated on Cinco de Mayo. Easy to remember, May 5th.
May 5th. Do you know, you mentioned some names. Are there any other, doing a little name dropping here, folks?
They're all in
who we
there.
might see?
Rick Barnes, the great coach at Tennessee, is receiving a special award. The McEnroe brothers, forget, there's 2 others. But people can go to dickvitale.com, and there's a lot of information there. But
It's right here on the bottom of the screen.
What's always up there is all the information on his annual gala.
On that note, Ray Cole, I've taken up enough of your time. You're a busy man. You're the busiest retired guy. I like to tease you and say that. And I just want to thank you.
Thank you, my friend.
So much for being here. I want to thank you for watching. Thank you for supporting us through patreon.com/Suncoast People. Thank you for your emails. We enjoy reading them and hearing about other people on the Suncoast who make this such a terrific place to live. In the meantime, I'm Robert Tim, and thanks for watching. Oh, and Hangin' With Winners. As a matter of fact, you don't even have to watch this episode. Just skip watching. Well, I know, you've already seen the show, but check out this book. Have a good day.